Hello and welcome back to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Shull, and I want to share with you that one of the biggest questions I get are, well, people say, tell me more about the old rides, and especially the rides and how they came to be and the rides that we no longer have. So with that inspiration, I'm going to be sharing on this episode the tale of two Aladdins. We've enjoyed Disneyland for almost 70 years. However, the design of Disneyland predates that. And when we think about it, we realize just how simple and basic and standard these appealing designs were to the public, because after all, they resonate over the decades. Well, maybe not this one, but, well, entertainment's got to start somewhere. The swinging Dumbo gave way to the articulated ear Dumbo, which gave way to the permanently affixed ear Dumbo, which became part of the 10-arm Dumbo. Although Dumbo didn't have pink elephants surrounding it, just the normal gray ones we know from the movie. Eventually, the 10-arm gave way to the 16-arm. So when the Magic Kingdom was built in Walt Disney World, Dumbo was part of the mix. Now, however, they found that, well, he was very, very popular, and a 10-arm Dumbo just didn't meet the capacity targets and the needs that that park had for its guests. Because after all, even with 16 arms, Dumbo only held 2 passengers, and that wasn't good enough. The solution to the Magic Kingdom's capacity program was not going to be in Fantasyland. It was going to be in Adventureland. No project gets built without a business plan. You have to have a return on investment after all. And in the case of Aladdin there in the Magic Kingdom, there are a couple of things that needed to be done. But one of them was to drive traffic to an existing shop. Now, this is the one across from the Enchanted Tiki Room, and it was in a good location, but as guests walked through Adventureland on their way to Frontierland to get to Thunder Mountain and Splash Mountain, their backs were always toward that shop, and therefore the shop did not get traffic. But in this case, Aladdin would provide that, well, roadblock, and therefore stop people who would then discover the shop. Ergo, the shop would make money. As I said earlier, the rides in Disneyland were pretty simple. Now, they were modification of old ride designs, but for the most part, when they deviated too far off the field to do something new, it didn't go very well. I've always loved the rocket jets in Tomorrowland. They were like a more high-octane version of Dumbo because those rockets didn't self-level. No. When you went up on the boom arm, you were banked against the land. What also was interesting is it had a tower, and the tower was purely ornamental, and that gave me an idea. When the idea for another form of a Dumbo ride was kicking around, I didn't want to do a Dumbo, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. But while I was working in Florida, I made a visit to the Morocco Pavilion, and there I found my answer. Among all the little shops of imported goods, I found an object that I thought would match very, very well to an extremely popular intellectual property film that Disney Animation had just recently released. One that I'd already had a little bit of a hand with, and one that I knew the Disney company was interested in because they've been rolling out entertainment to leverage what they had done. So, the jar, well, it became the top piece of that rocket jet. That piece that was purely ornamental and not needed at all. And that gave me the start. I carried that jar around with me to countless meetings for several years. And the team members always knew what I wanted. That jar today is here in my studio on my shelf. The Aladdin ride would have double the capacity of guests per guest vehicle. But that raised the question, what were the backseat people going to do? I was walking through IAPA with my show producer, and we were looking for a solution to the problem when we found it right in front of us. A lot of the booths in IAPA are really grand, beautiful, and they're selling product, but there are also other rows of vendors who are selling very small items, motors and actuators and chemical compounds and things like that. Things you don't think you need until you know that you do. And on one vendor's booth, we found a tilt mechanism. Then the light bulb went off and we realized, oh, we had our solution to Aladdin. In WDI terms, now the design was baked. So next stop was the airport. To get to Zamperla, I would start my journey in Los Angeles. My flight would leave from LAX, and then after a short 12-hour flight, I'd land in Munich, Germany, where I'd sit in a lounge for 4 or 5 hours and then pick up my plane to go to Venice. It sounds glamorous, but once you arrive in Venice, I pick up my bag and then get a boat, take it over to the car rental agency, pick up my car, and then drive for a whole hour and a half to Vicenza, Italy. It was worth it, though. The quality of the work that I saw coming out of the factory there in Zamperla over the years on the projects I work with them on was exceptional. Vicenza, Italy is the home of Zamperla, both their headquarters and their factory. Located in farmland, they're in north central Italy. It's a beautiful location. It's not where you would expect to see a theme park manufacturer, but they are that. And they work for decades for Disney and so many other theme parks. I passed the food dogs as I entered their building, underneath their sign, and back to their factory. Because I was here for business, and my business was on the shop floor of the factory. Aladdin's ride vehicle was inspired by the carpet from the film. But this carpet from the film had to be modified to become a ride vehicle. The genie makes an appearance because I drew these interlocking faces that were then painted onto the tower, the lamp. Eventually, everything worked out just as it should have, and the ride vehicle was dispatched there to the Magic Kingdom, where one day the project team, including myself, all gathered together to celebrate the completion. Predating the ride, there was an Aladdin parade in Walt Disney World. And what caught my eye about that were the 2 spitting camels. When they retired to stand guard over the restaurant there in Disney's MGM Studios, now Hollywood Studios. Well, that would never do. They needed to be over the Aladdin ride, and that's where they are even today. While living in Orlando working on the first Aladdin, I got the phone call there was going to be a second. The design of the Walt Disney Studios was, shall we say, thin on rides. And the park itself had gone through a lot of evolution from the very, very beginning when it was the Disney MGM Studios Europe to the park that it opened as, which was the Walt Disney Studios Park in Europe. Back to the rides. They had Rock and Roller Coaster and they had the tram. And that was all. So they wanted a third ride, and the natural third ride was to celebrate and leverage a property that people were familiar with. It was proven that Aladdin was popular in Europe. If you looked around on many of the main streets in Europe, you'd find Aladdin celebrated, and in many different ways. Designing the Aladdin ride for Paris was a different assignment, but I started with what I knew and what I'd worked on there already in Paris, and what I had already completed the design on for the Magic Kingdom. Now, those two things combined led me to a new design. The ride needed to be modified, and we needed a new queue. I confess to being one of the biggest haters of hidden queues, and yet I'm guilty for one of the biggest ones Disney's ever done. When it came time to adapt the Aladdin Magic Carpet ride for Paris, I had to put the queue somewhere, and therefore I had this enormous background skywall, and you went through a portal, and then you're in a switchback with a tall wall that kept you from looking back of house and toward the first gate, Euro Disneyland. Now, it did achieve its purpose, but looking back, if I had money and time,
I had so many better ideas that I could have pursued.
The ride system behind Aladdin became a new ride, rethemed ride for the Animal Kingdom. One, sadly, we're about to lose. And also, it became a ride there in Tokyo Disney Sea. Aladdin as an idea has had a lot of success in the Disney parks. As a parade, it was spectacular. And as a ride, it was a home run. After all, who doesn't want to soar above the clouds? Today, the first Aladdin that I designed for the Magic Kingdom continues to entertain guests and meet the business objectives of the Walt Disney Company. Just look out for those camels. They spit.
And that brings this episode of Disney Journey to a close. As always, thank you for supporting my channel by liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell notification button so you too are the first on your block to find out when a new episode is released. Until the next episode, it's goodbye from Lost Canyon.